Audience discretion is advised due to potentially distressing and sensitive material. It was August 23rd, 2002, and Michelle was on her way to a social services meeting. She was late and lost. She had recently lost custody of her 2.5-year-old son Joey, and she was determined to reunite with her sweet, beautiful boy. It really wasn't something she could control either, losing custody of her son. Her mother's boyfriend had gotten drunk and fractured Joey's knee. The abuse was nothing new, and this was the part that made her want to be a good mom and hope to get her son back and give him a good life. She herself had grown up with nothing but abuse and torture. Growing up, they didn't even have a couch. They didn't have a stove to cook on. There was a space heater that they warmed up their food on, but it took 4 hours for a hot dog to cook. She had an irresponsible mother, as you can probably guess from her son's custody case, and Michelle had to play the role of a mom for her 4 siblings who were younger than her. She was always there for them. She already had mother's instinct before Joey was ever born. She had also suffered sexual and emotional abuse and didn't trust men, so she decided to run away back when she was only 14. She figured it would be safer for her on the street than in her own house. It was rough. She had no way of getting food or shelter. She had no idea when or where her next meal would be coming from. She started living in a garbage can and cuddled up with a blanket she had stolen from somebody's back porch. But miraculously, something gave her a little bit of hope. Michelle had always loved singing and music. Part of the reason why she had run away was because, besides not having to hear things break and glasses and plates being thrown at the wall, she was able to enjoy singing without her mom shouting for her to shut up because she had a terrible voice. She knew this wasn't true, but coming from her mom and at that age, well, let's just say she couldn't help but believe her mom. Anyway, what gave her hope was a Baptist church where she heard beautiful music coming from. So she stepped inside, stood in the back, and sang along with the hymn they were singing. She hadn't forgotten that she smelled not very nice though. She was embarrassed, but she couldn't help it. The music and atmosphere were just mesmerizing. The church, however, became a place of refuge for her, where she was given food and clothes and a place to bathe. Someone noticed her at the church and told her father about it, and he ended up sending Michelle back to school. But life always has its ups and downs. At school, Michelle got bullied. At one point, one of the students shut a locker door on her hand and broke her wrist and thumb because they didn't want her on the basketball team. While in school, she met a boy and got pregnant, and this is how Joey had been born. Rough circumstances, but Michelle felt like heaven was in her belly. She was walking on cloud 9 and couldn't wait to meet her baby boy. This all flashed in her mind while she was desperately trying to get to the meeting. She even found a payphone to get in contact with them and tell them that she was lost and was gonna be late, but she couldn't reach them because the phone didn't work. Finally, she saw a convenience store and ran inside to ask for directions. She heard someone speak to her. It was a man. He said he could give her a ride to the meeting and it would only take him like 5 minutes. She was over the moon. Firstly, because it would work out great if she could get there in 5. Second, because she recognized the guy. He was Emily's dad, her friend, so she felt fine with accepting a lift from him. She was like, yes, this is gonna happen. I'm gonna get to the meeting on time and get my son back. So without wasting time, they got into the car. They start talking, and the guy is surprised when he hears she's on her way to a meeting to get her son's custody back. Michelle looked a lot younger than 21, and she was of a small stature. She then sees a sign advertising puppies for sale, and to make conversation, she says that her son loves puppies. The man offers to give her a puppy for free to give to her son when she sees him again, and she can't believe her luck. First the ride, and now the puppy. Things were going way better than she'd hoped for. So they get to his house, and he pulls up into the driveway and locks the gate to the yard. He turns around, smiles at her, and says it's a bad neighborhood and he's just being cautious. Michelle doesn't really overthink it, cause he was right. It wasn't the best neighborhood. They walk inside, and the guy tells Michelle that the puppies are just upstairs and she can go see. She takes the first step, but then realizes that she can't hear any puppies. She asks why, and he replies, cause they are napping. At this point, alarm bells are going off in Michelle's head. On the one hand, this is a guy she knows. He's her friend's dad. There's no way he's gonna do anything crazy to her. On the other hand, she knows the look in his eyes all too well. She's seen it every single time a male had sexually abused her. And there it is, she thinks. I am never getting out of here. Then she hears his voice. You're not gonna leave for a long time. And when she turns to look at him, he's already undressing himself. But this can't be happening. She has to get to the meeting. She needs to see her son. She starts begging him to let her see her son. The man rips up the only picture she had of Joey and speaks again. You will never see him. Michelle breaks at his words. The man raped her and bound her with an extension cord around her legs and arms and shoved a sock in her mouth to muffle her screams for help. He left her there without food for 3 days. From that day on, this man raped Michelle multiple times a day, and all she could do was go blank. She was kept on the upper floor of his house, always bound and locked up in a dark room. She was forced to use plastic toilets that were emptied infrequently and was only allowed to shower twice a week. She was fed once a day if he was on good terms with her and she hadn't talked back to him. Otherwise, he would starve her for days. But as if all this wasn't enough, he would taunt her by telling her over and over and over again that no one was looking for her, not even her family. And he wasn't lying. Sometimes he let her watch TV, and she could see segments about Elizabeth Smart, who had recently been rescued, and she never saw her own picture or heard her own name on the TV. Although Elizabeth Smart's case gave her some sort of fogged hope, she couldn't help but think of the fact that he wasn't lying. No one was coming for her. In the outside world, Michelle was filed as a missing person, but her case was quickly closed and very limited resources were used to look for her because she was 21, and the police just assumed that she had run away because of her son's custody case on her own free will, so no one was looking for her. A year later, Michelle sees another segment on another girl going missing in Cleveland. Apparently, she was walking home from Burger King where she worked and had never made it home. One day, the girl showed up at the house still wearing her Burger King t-shirt. Her name was Amanda Berry. It was April 21st, 2003. Amanda had just finished her shift at Burger King around 8 p.m. when she called her sister to tell her that she had a ride and she would be home shortly. You can guess who was giving her the ride. Well, the guy was her friend Angie and her co-worker Anthony's dad, so she was more than happy to catch a ride with a guy she thought she could trust. Plus, the next day was her birthday, so she couldn't wait to get home, get a good night's rest, and celebrate her birthday with her family. When she got into the car, the man told her that Angie was at his house and she could stop by to say hi, and Amanda happily agreed. When they walked into the house, there was no Angie. but the man distracted her with a guard dog, took her phone, and imprisoned her just like Michelle. The good thing was Amanda's disappearance got a lot of national attention because she was only 17 and her family was doing everything they could to find her, which gave Michelle some hope as well. A week after the abduction, the man called Amanda's mother to tell her that Amanda was fine and would be home in a couple of days. Needless to say, this didn't happen. At the same time, he told Amanda about the call he made, but told her that he told her mother that they should stop looking for her because they were now a couple. Meanwhile, he proceeded to do the same things to Amanda as he had done to Michelle. A year later, Gina DeJesus went missing on April 2, 2004. She was only 14. She was last seen around 3 p.m. while she was walking home from school. But she was not walking alone. She was walking home with her best friend, Arlene. They had called Arlene's mother to ask if they could arrange a sleepover that night, but her mom had said no. So the two had parted ways. After a while of walking alone, Gina saw a car pull over next to her. It was Arlene's dad. He was frantic and said he needed her help to find Arlene. So Gina, who had seen Arlene's dad many times before and their families were basically friends, did not hesitate to jump into the car with him as she had just been with Arlene and could help him find her fast. And no surprise here, Gina ends up in chains at his barricaded home. He did to Gina what he had previously done to Michelle and Amanda. His MO was basically to offer rides to girls that already somehow knew him and trusted him. He had a thing for girls of short stature with large breasts. He would then trick them into coming into his house, then he would proceed to masturbate and rape them once before restraining them in the basement, and chain and gag them and put a bike helmet on their heads. Then he would move them to a room upstairs where they were restrained again. There were padlocks on the bedrooms with a hole in the door for him to be able to spy on them even though they were already chained up. He went on raping them 4 to 5 times on a daily basis, and after he was done forcing himself on them, he would throw them some small bills to give himself the impression that the sex was consensual. The victims would use the money to get goods through a limited system he had designed. He even limited their interactions and they were severely beaten if they became too friendly. Amanda was featured in a 2004 segment where her disappearance was linked to Gina's disappearance. A self-proclaimed psychic told Amanda's mom that Amanda was already dead and was in water, which devastated her mom, but her family never gave up and continued to look for her. Amanda's mom died of a broken heart. Meanwhile, Gina's family also held vigils for her every year, and the guy who had her attended the vigils and tried to get closer to the family through handing out flyers for their missing daughter and getting involved in the search party. In 2005, the FBI released a sketch of the suspect in Gina's disappearance. It was a male Latino aged 25 to 35, 5'10", and 165 to 185 pounds with green eyes and a goatee. This was really close to what the perpetrator really looked like. Now the guy all 3 girls had trusted because he was their friend's father was Ariel Castro. Castro was born on July 10, 1960 in Puerto Rico to parents Pedro Castro and Lilian Rodriguez. After his parents divorced because his mother discovered that her husband had a second wife with whom he had 4 children and left them for his second family, his mother moved to Pennsylvania to work and left her 4 children with their maternal grandmother. While she was gone, Castro began to be repeatedly abused by a 9-year-old boy whose nickname was Pucho. He was only 5, and he was also raped by one of his uncles. But that was when he started to develop an obsession with sex and a compulsion to masturbate. Her mother returned to her children in 1966, but this didn't help at all, because she was also abusive towards him. According to Castro, she would insult him non-stop and hit him on a daily basis with a belt, a stick, or her open hand. Anyway, it was 1970 when Castro's family immigrated to the US and settled in Cleveland. 10 years after their move, Castro started dating his 17-year-old Puerto Rican neighbor Figueroa at the age of 20. This relationship led to Figueroa's family forcing him to take her into his own care because she had lost her virginity to him. A year later, their first child was born and all hell broke loose. It was like a switch had flipped. Castro changed radically and became extremely abusive and controlling, forcing Figueroa to stay home at all times. And even if she did leave the house for things like running errands or shopping, he had to select which shop she could go to. He even told her which TV programs she was allowed to watch. But this is not the whole story. If she strayed even a bit from the instructions, Castro would beat her relentlessly. In 1992, Castro and his growing family moved to 2207 Seymour Drive while he was working as a bus driver. Right after moving in, Castro weirdly started working in the basement. He installed a heavy trapdoor and added bricks to soundproof the basement, along with curtains so no one could see the inside of the basement. He was so paranoid, it seemed, that he even tainted the windows. None of the family members were allowed in the basement. His behavior escalated over time and with every baby that was born. He started beating Figueroa so bad that he broke her nose, ribs, and arms and only let her go to the hospital when she swore she wouldn't tell the authorities. He forbade Figueroa to use the phone, and while he left the house to do gigs or play with his bandmates, he would lock his family in. This didn't mean a couple of hours. They lasted for up to 4 days. When Figueroa became pregnant for the 5th time, Castro attempted to terminate the pregnancy by punching and kicking her in her belly, but it was unsuccessful. On one occasion, he even threw her down a set of stairs and she ended up with a cracked skull, which led to a blood clot in her brain which hardened into a malignant tumor. She began having seizures. The continuous attacks led to his arrest, but Castro made bail and managed to threaten her right before she was scheduled to testify before a grand jury, and successfully terrified her enough for her to take everything back and the charges were dropped. Eventually, Figueroa moved back in with her mother and got full custody of all her children, and Castro just let them go without having any sort of contact. But he did continue with his home repair and fortified the house even further, and he did this with materials he stole from his next-door neighbor. When the neighbor found out he was stealing from them, Castro threatened him with a shovel. But if you think fortifying is all he did with all the evil intentions he had, you are dead wrong. He went on to install multiple security alarms and place mirrors strategically all around his house to make sure he would see everything. But being the sick man that he was, after his family left, firstly he became deeply obsessed with BDSM, which to make things clear is not why we are calling him a sick man, and started fantasizing about holding a teenage girl in this house as a sex slave, and this is why we are calling him a sick man. Second, the moment he found out that Figueroa was dating a security guard named Fernando Collin, he lost it. He tried to run him over with his car when Fernando was driving the children to school. He even went as far as reconnecting with his daughters, who were teenagers by that point, and gave them money and presents and convinced them to claim that Fernando had fingered them in the vagina. He basically reconnected with his daughters to use them. Fernando was found guilty and sentenced to prison. He was even forced to register as a sex offender and was never able to expunge it from his record. He lost his job and Figueroa ended their relationship. Now keep in mind that this was going on while he had already kidnapped the girls. I mean, can you imagine that this guy had beaten his wife for years, breaking her bones and making her life a living hell, then went on to abduct 3 girls at the same time to rape them on a daily basis, then again tried to win back his ex-wife while he had the 3 girls. But after Figueroa turned him down even after Fernando was out of the picture, good for her, He told his prisoners that Amanda was now his new wife and began raping the other two, Michelle and Gina, in the backyard rather than inside the house. And if you're wondering how no one saw this happening, they did. The neighbors reported seeing girls in chains in his backyard and suspicious activities going on at his home, but the police claim that there are no records of such calls. He even had his children and relatives visit while the girls were held captive in his basement or the rooms upstairs, but no one ever knew. He turned on music that was so loud that no one could even hear them scream, and remembered that he had already soundproofed his house. But his son and brothers did say that there were parts of his house that were off limits and he placed padlocks on them. I'll let you guess which parts of the house they were. Sadly, Figueroa died in 2012 due to complications from her brain tumor, which was inoperable. Castro was also fired the same year for bad judgment, including making an illegal U-turn while there were infants and toddlers on his bus, using his bus to go grocery shopping, and leaving a child on the bus unattended while he went to grab lunch at Wendy's. By now, I think everyone has noticed that Castro had a favorite. Based on his own confessions, these were all crimes of opportunity, but he was specifically planning on kidnapping Amanda because she was blonde. While Amanda turned out to be his favorite, he disliked Michelle because she was the only one who talked back to him, so she received the most beating. Plus, she was starved for days and only got food that was sitting around for days or weeks and had been already mostly eaten by the other two girls in the house. Once, he got Michelle a dog that became Michelle's whole world in her ordeal, but when the dog bit him while he was beating Michelle, he snapped his neck and threw him in the garbage like trash. During the time he held the girls in his house, he tortured and raped all of them, but Amanda was held in a separate room than Michelle and Gina. He also impregnated them, Michelle 5 times and Amanda once. But while he beat Michelle with dumbbells, punched her in her stomach, and slammed her against walls every time for her to miscarry her babies or starved her, one of which she carried up to 3 months, she let Amanda carry her baby into full term and give birth, and didn't rape or beat her while she was pregnant. When Amanda went into labor, he took Amanda and Michelle to the basement where he had placed a small inflatable swimming pool and told Michelle to help her deliver the baby while he sat in a rocking chair reading a medical book and yelled at them to be quiet. At one point, the baby stopped breathing and Castro threatened Michelle that he would kill her if the baby died, and Michelle resuscitated the baby. The baby was named Jocelyn. Castro even started taking Jocelyn out when she was around 4, telling some that she was his granddaughter, while telling others that she was his new girlfriend's baby from a previous relationship. His initial intention was to leave the baby at a church, but after her birth, he got excited about the concept of becoming a dad again and let Amanda keep the baby. But the only assistance on his part as a dad was to allow Amanda out of her chains and giving Jocelyn some old toys. The baby's clothes were sewn out of old clothes by the 3 girls. Amanda taught her baby to read and write while in captivity, and Jocelyn brought a new kind of hope to the 3 girls. When she grew older and more aware of her surroundings, Castro changed Michelle and Gina's names to Juju and Chelsea, respectively, but Amanda could still use her real name. He also took out the chains after Jocelyn tugged on Michelle's chain and asked, "Juju lock?" He granted them limited movement throughout the house, but he was always there to supervise them, and he, at all times, carried a gun in his waist to keep them in line. He even unlocked some of the doors because Jocelyn complained about them being locked when Castro left the house. One morning, on May 6, 2013, Amanda notices that her daughter Jocelyn is freely running around downstairs when Castro was not home. She was scared to go downstairs and try to find a way out because it wasn't the first time that Castro had tricked the girls into thinking he was not there, and when they tried to escape, they had received severe beatings and were starved for days. So Amanda, being scared that this is one of those times, decides not to tell the girls for two reasons: not to give them false hope, and not to get them in trouble if it turned out to be a trap. So she walks downstairs and notices that the big inside door is not locked like always, but a padlocked storm door was blocking her way out. Then Amanda, terrified, managed to push the storm door open just enough to get a hand out, and started waving and screaming like crazy to get someone's attention. First, a neighbor saw her that didn't speak English, so he just walked past. But Charles Ramsey suddenly ran out of his house still holding his McDonald's burger and ran to the porch. He yanked on the door but couldn't get it open, so he told Amanda to kick in the bottom panel and crawl out with her daughter. They then ran to Ramsey's house where Amanda used his cell phone to call the police. She couldn't operate the phone because it was a smartphone. She'd been locked up for 10 years. Her daughter was 6. Amanda screamed in the phone when she finally connected to 911. Quote, "Hello, police? Help me. I'm Amanda Berry," she said, adding, "I've been kidnapped and I've been missing for 10 years, and I'm here. I'm free now." End quote. It was not long before the police showed up at the scene and went upstairs to look for Michelle and Gina. It was dark. Their guns were drawn. They slowly walked upstairs and announced themselves. Two very pale, thin, and malnourished girls slowly walked out of the room, and at the sight of the police, Michelle jumped into the arms of one of them and said, "Never let me go." They were so scared and relieved at the same time. After she let go, the officer said, "We've been looking for you for a long time." All 3 girls were transported to the hospital where Michelle was told that she had 2 days to live. They couldn't find out why she was bleeding or what was causing her stomach issues, and antibiotics weren't working on her because it was just too late. She was left partially blind and deaf from the abuse. Her jaw was so fractured that she slurred her speech. But like always, Michelle proved to be a survivor. She still sang and danced, and she eventually left the hospital to start her new life. Castro was arrested hours after the girls were rescued at a McDonald's parking lot after he had lunch with his family. While the girls asked for privacy to heal and be with their families, Castro pled not guilty to all charges. He claimed that the sex was consensual, and he had even paid the girls. He also claimed that Michelle's pregnancies being terminated was something they both agreed on, and he was just helping her get rid of the babies at her request. Before his sentencing, Castro addressed the court for 20 minutes straight, where he said he was a good person and not a monster. He was just addicted to sex and pornography and needed help he never got. He shifted between apologizing and blaming the FBI for failing to catch him earlier, and he also blamed the victims for getting into the car with a stranger. He even blamed the victims for not being virgins when he first kidnapped them, and said, "I'm not a violent person. I simply kept them without them being able to leave." But eventually, he pled guilty to 977 charges against him, including charges of kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder, and was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 1,000 years in prison without the possibility of parole as a result of a plea bargain. But he only served 1 month and 1 day of the sentence. He was found hanged in his cell. At first, it was assumed that his death was the result of an accidental autoerotic asphyxiation rather than a suicide, but the theory was rejected after an autopsy and details suggesting that he was depressed and wanted a way out. As for the victims, or better say the survivors, they are all living life to its fullest and are turning the world into a better place. Michelle has changed her name and is now living a blissful life with her loving husband. She is unable to have any more children because of what she went through. She has written 2 books about their ordeal in which she never calls Castro by his name, saying that she will not let him define who she is. She shares what the trio went through, saying that they celebrated their birthdays together, blowing candles that they held in one hand and an incredibly hard candy bar in the other. They would watch Vampire Diaries together when Casher wasn't home and discussed what would happen next on the show, hanging on to the slimmest chance of normalcy. As for Michelle's son Joey, by the time Michelle was rescued, he'd been adopted and she chose not to disturb his life with her ordeal and the complications she could cause him. She has also started a non-profit called Lily's Ray of Hope to support victims of child abuse, domestic violence, and human trafficking. Amanda and Gina got honorary diplomas from John Marshall High School. Gina volunteers for the Amber Alert Committee and started the nonprofit Cleveland Family Center for Missing Children and Adults. And Amanda joined the staff of Fox, where she hosts short segments about missing people, believing that big changes start with the smallest acts. Please leave any theories or comments you might have for us down below. We're really interested to know what you think about this case.